Hello, this is James Holland with Black & Company Realtors in Abilene, and today I've got a special guest with me. I've got Keen Umbehr. Good to see you. Keen is the Libertarian candidate for governor here in Kansas this year. We've also invited all the other gubernatorial candidates to sit in on this one-on-one forum. And so far, Keen has been the first to take the opportunity. Hoping to hear back from the Davis camp on scheduling. So we do hope to have a one-on-one interview with you, with each of our candidates here on Channel 2. I think that something we need to kind of start off with is get to know Keen a little bit. And I've visited with Keen previously on some of his background. I believe you're born in Great Bend, correct?
That's right.
And grew up in an oil supply business type of family. Tell me about that and the experiences of being in that kind of an environment.
Well, I was born in Great Bend, and during that time my dad worked for a company called Dresser Bar, which eventually took him to Nigeria, Africa. And so I did, I attended first grade in Nigeria, Africa, and then we moved around the corner of Africa to Angola, Africa. And then as you keep going up in the company, you end up in Singapore, Southeast Asia. Mm-hmm. That's where we went for most of our school years. That's where I met my wife, Eileen. First girlfriend, first date, just never ended. So then we spent the last half of my senior year in England, and then Eileen and I kept in contact the whole time, and so graduated from high school and then went to Minneapolis, Minnesota, got married, and spent one winter in Minnesota and decided that wasn't for me. And we moved back to my dad's hometown, Alma, Kansas. Yeah. So we raised our 4 sons in Alma and started all our businesses in Alma. So that's where we've planned ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah, my grandfather was an oil man down in southeast Kansas, and at that time, when most of my uncles had worked on a rig at some point, a pumper or something, it was a big business back then, and it did take quite a few of the middle management out of state, and then came back, and my personal experience is basically the same sort of thing. So but I always found Kansas to be a great place to come back to, and obviously you did. You've been for quite a while and started businesses and all of that.
Well, and we got back here in '79, and I was a noxious weed director for a couple of years, and then we had the opportunity to get in the trash business, so we got into debt beyond our wildest dreams, and had a franchise contract with Wabaunsee County to pick up all the trash in the county. And then along with that, eventually you start adding other businesses, a restaurant, a car wash, a tire disposal business. But I guess the important factor is during that 10 years we were had the contract with Wabaunsee County, we got I just was a government activist basically, and I'd attend meetings and write articles, and I had a weekly newspaper column called My Perspective, and I criticized the county commissioners, the very people that hold my contract. Good business plan, attack the people, give you money, but I felt like that was my First Amendment right to do so. They didn't think much of my criticism, so they eventually terminated the contract, and we ended up in a lawsuit that goes all the way to the United States Supreme Court. And we win, just to jump to the end of the story, 7-2. Mm-hmm. Supreme Court ruled that independent contractors working for the government do have the same First Amendment rights as government employees. Sure. So, that was a great win. We were still hauling trash. All our kids worked on the trash truck, except probably our littlest one. Mm-hmm. And so it's a good life. Yeah.
Well, and I've worked with local governments over the years, and there are actually not only for contractors to criticize the government, but also for city commissioners or county commissioners. Some of the decisions they make harm their businesses if they own one, with people who don't agree. And so if on every issue you've only got 51%, over the course of making several different decisions over the years, you're going to make somebody mad along the way that's going to impact their business. And I know that kind of keeps some people out of the public arena for that reason.
Well, I think the statement I heard, you can be in business and you can be in politics, just not at the same time. Mm-hmm. So right now I'm a criminal defense lawyer, a family practice lawyer, but I've actually closed down my law practice. I quit taking cases last March in anticipation of achieving the nomination for the Libertarian Party for governor. So I don't have a court schedule. I just have a handful of cases I have to address between now and June. And so we're just about done with our last few clients, and that allows me to run full time and be totally committed.
That's right. And that's I think the Libertarian Party has a very good message. Of course, as a just to put it out on the table there, I'm a Libertarian, so and I think I can speak to that. But I think it's been a challenge for that party and other third parties to be able to muster a candidate who does have the time to devote to it properly, without one of the big parties really pushing and supporting. So I think it's a wonderful effort to do it full time, and that's really the only way it should be done. I mean, there's no other way to do it. So even for a House seat or something like that, it's a full-time job to do those things. But you mentioned the First Amendment, your freedom of speech case that went up to the Supreme Court. I guess also tell me a little bit about the Topeka case and sexual harassment in the jail system there. Tell me something about that.
Yes.
You were involved in.
You're sitting in your easy chair and this issue comes across you. For me, it's very easy. If I'm very passionate about a case, about an issue, I just got to get involved. And I read this report about the female inmates being sexually abused by staff members at Topeka Women's Correctional Facility in Topeka. And that just got my attention, and we got involved in that case. I had an individual that was an investigator, and with the help of Tim Carpenter from the Topeka Capital Journal, an investigative news reporter, we started interviewing inmates and eventually got a contract, a representation contract with the actual female inmate that was sexually abused, and we exposed it. And it was worse than anybody thought, what was going on there. And it was being done by, state employees. And it read terrible, it was terrible, the optics were terrible. Those women at that correctional facility are there to do time, not to be entertainment for the guards. And as a result of that case, it had received widespread media attention. The Department of Corrections filed an ethics complaint against me, wanting to suspend me from the practice of law for 6 months. Normally, a lawyer that has any degree of self-preservation would be in utter fear of that, but it didn't strike me that way. Yeah. I wanted to make the issue bigger, so I demanded a hearing. I demanded they bring forth their complaint in public, on the record, and after 2 years of demanding that, they finally dismissed the charges. But it was, in a sense, a threat of retaliation from the Department of Corrections.
Sure.
And, one of my campaign platforms is government accountability and transparency. It's been so overused, but, the only way citizens know what their government is doing in their name is through the Kansas Open Records Act and Kansas Open Meetings Act. But through the years, the law has gotten smaller and smaller, allowing less and less information. Now it's a peephole in the door that the government puts their thumb across. And the only way we can correct problems is if we know what the problems are. Okay, so if we keep the problems hidden, we can't ever correct them. And so I am a big proponent on making some amendments to those laws. And quite frankly, the one simple amendment that needs to be made is if a plaintiff goes to court and sues a government agency on open records or open meetings law violation, they can recover their attorney fees. Because right now the maximum penalty is $500. Well, there's no state agency that fears open records, open meetings with that small of fine. We have to make it significant, that they would think twice about whether or not there's really closing a meeting or denying a record appropriately. Yeah.
Well, and I think that's probably a really good example of something we need to see more in politics, is somebody willing to put principle ahead of political expediency, or in your case, being able to practice law. And I think it's good to see people act on principle. And maybe there's too less of that, too much of the other, catering to the political winds of the day. So I think that's a wonderful thing to you know, and civil liberties, I know, is something, you know, just there's two examples: the freedom of speech and the abuse by government. And I know that's part of your platform is really solidifying or you know, preserving those things. Are there other ways you look at doing that?
Well, you know, like I said, the Supreme Court case was the First Amendment. These female inmates at TCF was an Eighth Amendment, cruel and unusual punishment violation. We also have the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law.
Right.
And that kind of moves us over in talking about the current tax plan, the 2012 tax plan that the legislature passed and the governor signed, that allows 191,000 people that run their own business, sole proprietorships or LLCs, they're called pass-through companies, they're allowed to pay zero income tax. But there's 1.3 million W-2 wage earners that have to pay all the income tax, and there's no plans on changing that. There's, you know, it's not on between 2014 and 2019, it's not on the agenda. So basically in the percentages, 13% of Kansas pay zero income tax, 87% pay it all. Well, you know, I'm the beneficiary of a perfect political storm, and you know, it's not that I'm so smart or I'm just blessed to be here at this time, at this moment, but those 1.3 million W-2 wage earners are highly motivated. They're looking for equality, equal protection of the law. Their families are just as important as the families as the business owners. And, you know, not to say the business owners were asking for this, they weren't asking for it. It was kind of, you know, the governor's attempt to move Kansas from an income tax state to a zero income tax state. 9 states in the United States have zero income tax.
That's right.
But we'll be the first state that had an income tax. See, those 9 states never had it.
Never had it.
So we're going to try to move, or my plan is to move those 1.3 million to the same zero income tax status as 191,000.
Sure, and you know, the argument on that, of course, equal protection under the law, people just need to remember that taxes are law. And it's clear when you've got a tax code that's that big that not everybody's being treated properly or equally, certainly. And you can make the argument whether that's good for the rich people or the poor people, but you know, equality is equality. And a libertarian viewpoint of that would be exactly what yours is that you know, equal protection under all laws. And I think that clause right there goes over to so many social issues, which we won't necessarily get into, but it you know, it certainly our laws would get much smaller if there was equal protection, because you wouldn't be picking out different people for different things. So so that's I think the simplicity is something I hope the electorate would be looking for.
Well, it's a concept they can grasp. Equal protection under law all the time for all citizens.
Right. Yeah. So. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, and of course, we've been somewhat the beneficiary of that in recent law too, being a small business owner. But you know, I know a lot of business owners, if there was no income tax, they'd probably pay their people better, and everybody'd be much better off that way. Of course, the legislature now is saying, well, you've got the three-legged stool, right? You've got your property taxes, your sales taxes, and your income tax, and we really can't make it in Kansas without all three of those. What is your response to that type of argument?
Well, the argument is if we move those 1.3 million to zero income tax status, we will make Kansas state expenditures, will make the state government unstable. And I don't believe so. You know, I want smaller government. The growth of government between 2014 and 2019, they're increasing taxes and expenditures between 2014 and 2019. They are depending on those taxes, collection of revenue to increase, and then they got spending right underneath it. And the fact of the matter is, the governor sits on top of 20 state agencies. He needs to reduce the size of government, and that's what libertarians want. We don't think government is the answer. So we want smaller government with smaller missions to put a smaller imprint in people's lives. Now, there's a debate on what the figure is, how much money the government or state of Kansas would actually lose by moving those 1.3 million over. But it's between 1.7 and 2.9 billion dollars. That's a lot of money. But then if you look at it the other way, if that's the amount of money they're taking out of W-2 wage earners' paychecks, well, then that money's going right back into the economy twice a month into 105 counties, into 627 communities, or a number of cities are in the state. And that's going to start the economic engine. Chamber of Commerce tells us that each dollar turns over 7 times before it leaves the state. So that, pick a number, 1.7 billion or 2.9 billion, whatever numbers they're using, is actually going to turn over 7 times with a sales tax right now of 6.15. They're going to get most of that back.
Right.
You know, depending on which number you use, one is $1.3 billion back in increased sales revenue or tax revenue.
Yeah.
So, but you know, my position is I want to tie the state budget to our state domestic product. You know, because if we're making laws that degrade our prosperity, then we got to figure out why, and whether or not that's a good thing to do. I don't believe it is. To have prosperity for all, we have to make sure that the government doesn't continue to pass laws for the sake of passing laws and that degrade our ability to become prosperous again. I believe the proper role of government, James, is to be as a shield between bad legislation and the people of Kansas. And right now, we don't see that. But I will. You know, I got 4 simple principles when I look at a law that comes on across my desk. First, is it constitutional? Give you an example. Section 2, Article 16 of our state constitution disallows the bundling of bills. Except for appropriations bills, it disallows it. Well, we see bundled bills all the time. Why aren't they following the Constitution? The school district finance bill signed by the governor this year was a bundled bill. You know, there was an appropriations provision in it, but there was also a lot of provisions that weren't. Technically, he should have vetoed it on basis alone. There are other reasons he should have vetoed it, but that's the constitutional reason. Sure. So first, is a bill constitutional, and does it treat, secondly, does it treat all Kansans equally all the time? You know, that must be a must. Second, is the law needed? And third, is it paid for? Or fourth, is it paid for? Yeah. And if any of those answers are no, the bill should, by all rights, be vetoed. And so when I'm governor, I will be vetoing a lot of bills because the legislature is kind of used to doing a business a certain way, and it'll take them a couple of terms to figure out that there's a new way that we're going to do business in the state.
Sure. And there tends to be a tendency with governments to justify their existence in some ways. And I know, of course, Texas, their legislature meets only once every other year. And sometimes you see, I mean, I've been, you know, local government watching things for 20 years, and it seems like some of the same issues get rehashed every 5 or 10 years. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost like we need to find laws to pass just to justify us being here. And in a lot of cases, it's just resolutions. I mean, we're going to bring up a resolution for just about everything and spend state money doing it. So
okay, let me give you a perfect example. Yeah. This year, 2014 legislature passed a bill that disallows people 18 years or less from going to a tanning booth. Now, I think that's a parental decision. If I don't want my son or daughter to go to a tanning booth, I'll make that decision. But the legislature thought it was such an important thing that they had to pass a bill. Mm-hmm. Well, what does that bill cost to enforce? Because now we got to develop some kind of enforcement mechanism and pay people to enforce, and more state employees means higher budgets, and again, a bigger imprint in our life.
Yep, absolutely.
You know, renaming roads. You think, well, what's the cost of renaming a road? Well, producing signs at each and every intersection along that road is not free. So, I mean,
that's right.
We have to watch how we spend our tax dollars, and if we connect it to our state domestic product, I think that's ought to be the guide for us.
Yeah, you know, that's a good feedback loop. Mm-hmm. You know, to say here's how much government we can afford, you know, right. and keep our economy as vibrant as it needs to be for for the benefit of everybody. Switching gears to another big state issue, school finance. Of course, that's been a big. It's made for some strange bedfellows, but. Tell me, what do you kind of see as far as, well, a couple issues related to schools, but let's talk first of all about this finance formula and that sort of thing. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the school district finance formula as it's currently drafted now, few people, myself included, can't figure out the funding mechanism. I mean, we look at the bottom number, but if we just look at the bottom numbers, there's state aid to students and there's federal aid to students. Combine the two together, it's a little over $12,500. My position is every student deserves the best education we can give them. Now, the devil's in the details. And I believe that the money, that $12,500 should follow the student, not the building. So if I want to send my student to another public school, fine. Private school, fine. Parochial school, military school, home school, that money's our money. It's not like it comes from anybody else. It's our money, and not all students can thrive in the same environment. Mm-hmm. And to say we have to have equal educational opportunities, well, the only way to have that is to give those students that ability to go to these different forms of school: public, private, parochial, military, homeschool. There's an online school. I mean, so there's a lot of ways to deliver that. We spend 51% of our state budget on K through 12. And if you listen to certain people, that's not enough. We have to spend more. And if you add the colleges, the Board of Regents, that's 16%. So now we got, add it all together, 62% of our entire state budget is to education. There's a limit to how much we can continue to fund education. We have to fund it smarter, not with more money. And so I am really a big advocate of school choice, because I think it's a free market-based system. It adds competition to the mix, when public schools have to compete with private and parochial and military and home schools for results, because that's what we want. At the end, we want results. We want our kids.
Yeah, and I think nobody knows their kids better than the parent. And if the parent isn't free to make those choices, or is, for some reason feels economically contained in a box where they can't make that choice, I have to send them to public school because I'm paying property taxes for it. Mm-hmm. Or even if I'm a renter, part of my rent is built in there. So so I don't know if it's a voucher mechanism or a rebate on your property taxes, but I think school choice and giving the parents back some of the decision making in that process, and making sure the carrot's there too, which is fair. I mean, like you say, it's their own money.
Right.
It seems like that should be a model that would work. And in Kansas, where we like to think we're free and we're have some individualism still left and ruggedness, why we can't be more for that choice is well, it's an easy answer.
Right.
The school lobby. I mean, the teachers are wonderful people. I mean, and everybody protects their turf, but they certainly are a very strong lobby. And in a lot of towns, if you really look at the wage earners in those towns, probably the teachers are some of the best as a group, the best paid people in a lot of counties around here, I would think. So.
Well, and they have a tough job. There's no question. Public school teachers, by and large, I think, as a general statement, do a great job. Yep. But when we try to start equalizing all students from Johnson County to Stewart County, different area kids, the rural kids versus urban kids, the high urban Johnson County kids want to learn. They learn in a different environment, mm-hmm. and we need to be able to educate every student to the point where they can leave high school and get a job, or leave high school and be successful in technical college, or leave high school and be successful in a 2-year, 4-year college. But even when you get out of college, that's not a ticket to success either. No. We have to have that work ethic, that risk-taking entrepreneurism. Even if you work for somebody, you are selling your labor to that company and for a result. Mm-hmm. And we have to have our students have that educational background to be successful.
Yeah, I think a work ethic, regardless of the demographic or what part of the state you work in or live in, that's a real difficult one. It seems
right.
to instill children with a work ethic is very difficult. At least that's what I've found. And I think another part of educational choice, get your thoughts on this, is getting more into technical side of things, because the business I'm in and my wife's in, finding a good carpet layer, finding somebody who knows basic carpentry and is very good at it, is sometimes a challenge, and those that can do it make very good money. So why is that not a career choice that should be supported and pushed on through the school systems? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is, right now we're the victim of equalization, and when a student, it should be like college, where they have they need the basics, and then the last 2 years of their high school education, they ought to be able to sit in a track. Either it's going to be a technical track or a college track. Right now, if you can lay bricks, fix a diesel engine, hook up an air conditioner, you're going to actually make more money sooner than the college graduate.
Yep, absolutely.
And so that just seems to make sense, and we got to meet students where they're at. Mm-hmm. And we have to stop thinking this one size fits all. The one curriculum is going to do all things for students. It's not. Now, I know change is hard. People reject change just outright. Mm-hmm. But when we get to that point where we can actually see students be successful, you know, for example, farm kids going into the workforce have a lot of experiences that rural or urban kids don't have. You know, farm kids welded, he's plowed, he's drove tractors, he's put up hay, he's done all these things. He's got a whole quiver full of experiences he can pull out. You know, urban students may have more technical skills. They can get on a laptop, they can get on an iPad, they can search, and so they're going to be successful. Mm-hmm. But to say we all have to learn the same way at the same rate and the same material, mm-hmm. I think that's where we're failing our students.
Yep, absolutely. And I think some of that's going to be inevitable. Change is inevitable, and of course in western Kansas, change in schools and counties, you know, you're gonna, it's inevitable that you're gonna see more homeschooling, virtual schooling, consolidation of districts, mm-hmm. And maybe even consolidation into counties. You know, that's obviously a trend that's coming.
Right.
Didn't know if you had any thoughts on that, or I don't know it's.
Well, you know, it's interesting.
It's happening.
You know, each county is made up of a certain number of townships, and the townships used to be the power mm-hmm. Of the county. They used to be more powerful than the county commissioners themselves. But that's kind of a thing of the past, and townships are becoming less and less, I hate to use the word relevant, but we're going to have to change and do things more efficiently. And economies of scale allow us all to do efficiently. Wabunsee County, we have 12 townships, and for each township to have their own road grader, their own employee, and their own tank, that might have worked back then, but now, you know, when we look at the overall, you know, best business practices, mm-hmm. that's not the best business practice. So as the townships are collapsed under a total county control for the roads and bridges, and as we move into school districts, what do we have, 286 school districts in 105 counties. You know, it is a terrible word, consolidation, because people, you know, believe it means the destruction of their schools. But if we have to come up with a plan that educates students irrespective of what school district they're in. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to put kids on a bus for an hour every day to and from school. So there has to be a better way to do it. And to do that, we have to try new things, innovative school districts where they can, you know, be relieved of the burdens and the regulations upon them and see if they produce the results. That's what we're looking for, mm-hmm. results.
Yeah, so. and that's certainly something with, you know, libertarian perspective would be, boy, we really don't need the U.S. Department of Education because these decisions are made best locally, and basically all they're doing is siphoning up money and playing a shell game, taking their cut, playing a shell game, sending it back to the people who gave it to them in the first place. You know, so local government, smaller government at the local level, and school districts, you know, that is, you know, personally, for most people, you know, one of their strongest holds to a town nowadays. It used, right. I mean, it might have been a business at one time or family, but now it's a school district. And those, you know, that basketball game 30 years ago with the last second buzzer beater that put Abilene over Chapman or whatever the case is, right. you know, they thrive on that. People sure. still thrive on that emotionally. And right. when it's an emotional issue, change is even harder than if it's not an emotional issue.
It is. So we got to figure out a way to keep the community school mindset alive, yeah. but change the organization of how we do it, which means bigger districts covering more grounds with more school board members, so each community, you know, does have a say on their school district.
Sure.
So yes, we have to do that if we're going to be successful in the future. We have to change. You know, buggy whips were great when You know, we had horses, but then we moved over to automobiles. The buggy whip makers had to adapt.
You know, and I don't have an ice maker delivering ice to my house either. And so, you know, these things happen. There was an ice maker that got it, and he was put out of a job because of that innovation, but we're all happy now. So anyway, that's been a good conversation. I don't know how long we've been here, but I do appreciate your time, Keen.
Thank you.
And I wish you luck on the trail. And I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to kind of wrap up and add?
Well, the only thing I'd wrap up is give libertarians a look. You know, you can look at the results of the other two political parties over the years, the results we've actually achieved, and not to be disrespectful of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, but you know the results those two parties have produced over the last several decades. So give the libertarians a look, you know, and I think we're going to surprise you. Thank you.
Yep. And I think libertarians are usually conservative on economics and government, and liberal on social issues. And in general, that seems to be the way it works out. And so that really is attractive to a lot of different people, I think.
It's a blend of the center values that we all have. You know, it's not extreme. You can't run a country or state from the extremes. It's the center. It's jobs, schools, economy, and healthcare. You know, that's where most people are involved.
And it's all about the rights of the individual.
That's right.
Above all. So anyway, I appreciate your time. And once again, we are here at EagleCom. We've invited all of the gubernatorial candidates to a one-on-one discussion. And later on in the year, it's not scheduled yet, but we will have a candidate debate at the Eisenhower Library and Museum. And look for that on your schedule sometime in the future. Once again, this is James Holland with Black & Company Realtors in Abilene. We'll talk to you next time.